Pakistan's percentage of out-of-school children is even lower than the cumulative average of countries that are classified as low-income countries. We've been declaring educational emergencies every 5 years. In 2024, the current government also declared a national education emergency. 80% children who have never been to school, this is probably among the highest percentage of those who have never been to school in the world.
Hello everyone, welcome to Fiscal Focus at DawnNews English. I am Danish Khan, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Rafiullah Kakar. Rafi is currently PhD candidate at University of Cambridge, and he's studying political economy of education. Previously, Rafi has worked at the Planning Commission as member social sector. Today, we're going to touch upon a wide array of issues, but primarily political economy of education in Pakistan. Thank you, Rafi, for joining me today.
Thank you, Danish, for having me on the show. It is a great honor to be here.
So tell me more about how you understand the political economy of education. We hear a lot about a large number of children out of school, learning poverty, gender disparity in educational outcomes. How do you see this?
Thank you very much. I think the situation of Pakistan with regards to education and other social sectors is quite poor, and this is a well-known story. But sometimes I realize that despite it being a well-known story, the extent of this crisis is probably not realized by our mainstream is not realized in our mainstream discourse. So just to give you a sense of where we stand compared to our regional peers and other developing countries. So to begin with, for example, for its level of economic development, Pakistan is among the poorest performers on human capital development. If we start with, let's say, the percentage of out-of-school children, currently in Pakistan, nearly 36% of the school-age children are out of school. Now, this percentage is even higher than the percentage of out-of-school children for low-income countries. So Pakistan is categorized as a low and middle income country. But Pakistan's percentage of out-of-school children is even lower than the cumulative average of countries that are classified as low-income countries. And there are barely 10 to 11 countries, most of them or nearly all of them in sub-Saharan Africa, which have a higher proportion of out-of-school children than Pakistan. In South Asia, we have the highest, and our percentage is almost equal to that of Afghanistan, or was equal to that of Afghanistan at least a couple of years ago. Similarly, when it comes to learning, it is a shocking fact that 79% children of age of grade 10 cannot read an age-appropriate text. Now, these are just few numbers, but they indicate the crisis of education that our country is facing, and unfortunately, we are right at the global bottom. On these indicators.
There is a pushback that these numbers are exaggerations. Do we know how these estimates are, or how these numbers are measured, or these are like rough estimates? So there is a margin of error here.
Of course, there are margins of error with almost any data. And most of this data is based on the census and PSLM data. Now, the census data is, in terms of social indicators, it's probably the most reliable indicator or data one can get. I think the only data that has greater chances of errors and probability of errors is the data pertaining to conflict zones such as Balochistan and former FATA. That data has more inaccuracies and coverage issues. But the data for mainstream Pakistan, that's quite robust. I mean, the errors, the margins of error are very small. And remember, this is not the only source of data. There are multiple sources of data, and we are fortunate that the education data regime is quite rich and has diverse sources. So we have the mixed data source. Mixed surveys are conducted by the provincial government. PBS and census are PSLM and census data are gathered by the federal government, and then we have administrative data gathered by the provincial government. So on most of these indicators, all of them nearly point to the same situation, as I said, except for provinces like Balochistan and areas like former FATA, where the margin of error is greater than other areas.
Makes sense. So you underscored two key things here. One, the lack of access, i.e. the out of school children, and B, the learning poverty, which is known in the literature that students, even those who are enrolled, are not fulfilling the standard targets set by education departments. Now, what are some underlying causes for this? Because I remember in 2019, the government declared educational emergency, but yet it seems like there hasn't been any improvement.
Yeah, we have been declaring educational emergencies every 5 years. In 2024, the current government also declared a national education emergency. So anyhow, coming back to your primary question, so I'll start with the proximate drivers of this crisis. To begin with, at the outset, I think it's important to emphasize that the poor quality of education lies at the heart of this crisis. And please also allow me to express that the entire developing world has moved from addressing the schooling expansion crisis to focus on the learning crisis. So the world has almost celebrated the end of the schooling crisis, and developing world has made significant strides in overcoming access-related challenges. So for the past 2 decades, both the governments of developing world and international organizations, multilateral partners and donors all have shifted their focus towards improving learning outcomes. Pakistan, unfortunately, is one of those few limited countries in the world where we still face significant access deficits as well as issues in learning. Now, coming to our learning crisis, just to give you an indicator, and this probably is, to me, it's the most shocking stat of Pakistan's education landscape. And if there ever was a stat in the education landscape that I would recommend to be double checked and validated, it is this. So currently, as you know, 36% children are out of school. These amount to 26 million children. And out of these 26 million children, can you believe this? 80% are those who have never been to school, which implies that the primary issue of the schooling crisis in Pakistan is not the dropout rates. It is an issue, but it's not the primary issue. The primary issue is that children are not even going to school. So 80% children who have never been to school, this is probably among the highest percentage of those who have never been to school in the world. My takeaway from this, and I am saying this now on the basis of other qualitative research, is that this indicates the extreme lack of parental confidence in public education, which has significant policy implications. If parents are not willing to send schools to their kids when there is a private alternative available, then the policy implications are, is there any point in government continuing to invest in public school infrastructure? Should the government invest in, let's say, building parental confidence? Should the government, let's say, invest in going for PPPs? I don't know the answer. All I'm trying to highlight is this is the first important aspect, that 80% of your out-of-school children are those who have never been to school. Now, then coming to the other determinants, in my humble opinion, the single biggest, the 2-3 single biggest supply side drivers of the out-of-school children crisis and the learning crisis are, first, the non-availability of teachers, shortages of teachers. Pakistan's education system faces an issue of chronic shortage of teachers. This differs by levels of education. So, for example, we have sufficient number of teachers available at the middle and high schools. The issue is more acute at the primary level. In places like Balochistan, more than 40% of the existing primary schools are single teacher schools. In Sindh, more than 20 to 25% of the existing schools are single teacher schools. Now, imagine a teacher teaching to 5 classes and 5 or 6 classes. That's unimaginable. But then it's also a question of inefficient distribution of teachers. So, for example, when it comes to high school, Pakistan probably has better student-teacher ratio at high school than the US, than Europe, than UK. Just to give you a sense, in Balochistan, at the high school level, there is a teacher available for every 4 students. For every 4 students. Even in more populous provinces like Punjab, there is a teacher available for every 17 or 18 or 20 students at high school level. So this is a more than optimal student-teacher ratio when it comes to high school. Similarly, we have better ratios at middle school. The issue is more serious at the primary school level. So shortages of teacher is the most significant supply side driver, followed by distance to schools post-primary. So while we have sufficient number of primary schools across the country, the real issue is the great distance to schools after primary. And this is a significant barrier, particularly for girls after primary to continue their education. Distance remains a major barrier. So distance, shortage of teachers, and other than this, the third, and again, I think this is one area where I believe I usually challenge the mainstream public discourse regarding education. And the mainstream, one of the central components of the mainstream discourse is that Pakistan doesn't spend enough on education. While I totally agree with this, we need to increase our spending on education. But in my humble opinion, this probably is a secondary issue. The primary issue is the efficiency and effectiveness of whatever public expenditures we are making on education. The existing education expenditures are extremely ineffective and inefficient. And the reason is, so there are, as you know, there are 2 components of the budget, the current and development budget. So the current budget almost entirely or 90% goes into salaries. The development budget, that's the discretionary component where governments, that's the policy lever that government can use to prioritize deficient areas in education. However, this budget is almost entirely driven by political considerations, which means that despite spending huge amount of money, we are not able to address the primary needs. Just to quote an example, and this is happening both at the federal level, and since I'm particularly familiar with Balochistan, I'll give examples from that context as well. So nearly all provinces have spent billions of rupees on the development of education in the post 18th Amendment period. But this has not translated into commensurate improvements in access-related indicators, let alone learning. And one of the reasons is the bulk of this budget has gone into the construction of these large infrastructure boarding schools. At the federal level, in Punjab, Danish schools. In Balochistan, we have these residential schools, cadet colleges, and so on the face of it, you see that the budget has been increased. Greater public amount is allocated towards education, but since that is spent on since that spending is not necessarily aligned with the most pressing needs of the education system, so the outcomes remain stagnant. So these are just few of the examples this is just one of the example of how the existing public spending is not aligned with the most pressing needs. And these 3, in my opinion, are some of the most important proximate drivers of the education crisis in Pakistan.
Well, this is fascinating, especially the fact that a lack of school teachers, as you identified as a major factor for primary school under-enrollment. This is fascinating. Also, we notice huge gender disparity at all levels, especially at primary and secondary level. Now, in terms of, it seems like on surface, that shouldn't be a difficult crisis to solve, given that Pakistan has large number of young college-educated people who can be hired as primary school teachers. So help me understand this, because this seems like a very basic common sense solution, but where are the constraints or why this hasn't been done so far?
This is a very good question. As you're aware, we recently developed the District Education Index across Pakistan, where we compile data on at least 34 indicators of education to get a sense of where the districts of Pakistan rank and perform compared to each other. And one of the aspects involved a focus on gender equity. And I was myself pleasantly surprised to see that at the primary level, at least in places like Punjab and even Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, our gender indicators are quite good. We have made significant strides in improving gender equity at the primary level, at least. The real challenge starts post-primary, where, as I said, number one, the distance to there is a sharp decline in the number of schools post-primary, which in places like Balochistan mean that there is an increase in distance by several kilometers. But this is an issue even in places like Punjab. The other issue that compounds this is the lack of teachers, or female teachers in particular, the lack of availability of female teachers. And one thing I would like to argue here, that based on my experience as a policy practitioner in Pakistan, and I have had the privilege of serving and working in some of the remotest parts of the country. And you'll be surprised to know that supply side, the major barriers to female education are almost entirely supply side factors. The factors that you hear, that cultural barriers and other demand side factors, particularly cultural issues, are not a major barrier to female education. Yes, we have household poverty is a major issue on the demand side. But other than this, wherever there is quality schooling option available, even the poorest parents have opted to send their kids and girls to the schools wherever a decent quality schooling option is available. So it's almost entirely a supply side issue. And I think the perceived quality, post-primary distance, teachers availability, and in some cases, yes, household considerations such as poverty and other norms such as early child marriages. But I have seen even in the remote and most conservative and patriarchal districts of Balochistan that poor parents want their girls to continue their education, and they are willing to postpone their age of marriage in the hope that a better education will get them at least good rishta prospects. But nearly in all places, the major barrier, as I said, is the lack of availability of quality education.
Makes sense. Now, generally, when we look at the function of the state, one of the primary function is to provide basic public goods, including education, and for multiple reasons. But the most obvious reason is because an educated workforce, and then again, here I'm using more as an economic argument. Of course, there are moral, ideological, and social justice arguments for making sure everybody gets access to education. But at a very basic level, for economic development, you want an educated, skilled labor force that can contribute to economic activity. And then this therefore makes sense that even the elites would like to have an educated workforce, right? So how do we explain this? Because in a common sense way, a basic capitalist state would ensure that people have access to public goods such as education so they can be an effective workers. So what's going on in the case of Pakistan?
I think that's a very good question. On the face of it, it appears that there is a societal consensus on prioritizing education. This is indicated, among others, by the increased budgetary allocations for education, particularly in the wake of the 18th Amendment, when authority over education was completely devolved to the provinces. nearly every province has been spending 20% on average, 20% of its total budget on education, which is exactly in line with the benchmark recommended for low and middle income countries by the World Bank and other international partners. Similarly, the significant reforms have been introduced into education planning, management, and monitoring and governance over the past decade. The number of reforms that have been introduced in education across all 4 provinces in the wake of the 18th Amendment, that's just unprecedented. I think the entire reforms introduced in the 4 decades preceding the 18th Amendment probably would not match the reform efforts that have been made in the wake of the 18th Amendment. So these input-centric efforts indicate the commitment of the political elites to do something about education. However, the increased budgeting and reform efforts are not translating into the desired outcomes. Here, in my humble opinion, the political economy explanations come into play. Notably, in most places, the continued dominance of patronage-based politics. That remains a major hurdle in the way the available education resources are used. So I'm talking about both human resource and financial resource of education. So that's one challenge which explains why the increased public spending and reform efforts are not translating into improved outcomes. The other explanations, again, they are political economy explanations. They pertain to the political instability in the country. And as a student of political economy, my understanding is that one of the major pathways through which political instability influences elite commitment is time horizons. Mm-hmm. Now, at the federal level, you can see that the highest office in the country, that is the Prime Minister, the chief executive of the country, that the average tenure of the Prime Minister has been hovering around 2 to 3 years over the past 3 decades. Now, no Prime Minister or no smart Prime Minister would prioritize anything that involves some long-term time commitment. The returns, particularly with regards to learning, can be realized only in the long term. So this means that in the given political circumstances of Pakistan, learning cannot rationally be prioritized by any political leader. Now, the real question for me is, learning is not even a major issue for me in the context of Pakistan. The real question for me is, why has access-related indicator not improved in Pakistan? After all, many other developing countries have improved access because of patronage, not despite patronage. So in the context of Pakistan, the only explanation that comes to my mind is that even, first, I think Punjab and KP have been making progress in improving access to education over the past 2 decades. So, for example, Punjab's share in the national out-of-school children population has reduced from 51% in 1998 to almost 36 or 37% in 2023. Similarly, KP's share in the national out-of-school children has remained relatively stable despite the conflict, despite the merger of FATA and other issues. I think the real issue lies with the way education is managed in Balochistan and Sindh. Balochistan, again, is really easy to explain. Balochistan, political elites in Balochistan have the shortest time horizons across Pakistan. We have no chief minister probably has survived more than 2 years or 2.5 years. Extreme political instability. Then there are serious issues of legitimacy of the political elite. So as a result, the ruling coalition in Balochistan is not only highly exclusive, highly fragile, but also there is rapid turnover. I mean, with the military as the constant player, the other players keep changing within 2 to 3 years. So that means in Balochistan, the chief minister or the ruling coalition has absolutely no incentive to invest in any medium-term project. And Sindh is a very surprising case for me, that they have political stability, continuity, and the political dispensation in Sindh stands to benefit from increased investment, not only in access but in learning. But I think it's the social realities of Sindh, or the political realities of Sindh, where patronage politics probably continues to play an important role. I think that explains why they have not made the progress that they could have done.
So, I mean, good points. But if I push back on this argument of the time horizon, right? Just if we think about it, and that issue is present in any elected office anywhere in the world, because for many projects the returns are in the medium and long run, and the term is limited. And that's where the whole idea of this Weberian state is, that bureaucracy come in, and so you have some basic agreements or consensus, i.e. the social contract, such as access to education for everyone, which, irrespective of who's in the political regime, continues. So now if I go back to high development theory of 1970s and 80s, and as you are doing PhD and you are reading and learning about it, there the term is mobilized, called semi-feudal relations. The land ownership is highly skewed in the case of Sindh province. So maybe those elites, again, I'm just throwing it out, the argument was maybe those elites actually don't want an educated labor force or educated population or citizens, empowered citizens who can challenge the existing patronage relationship and maybe mobilize a transformative politics. Can that be an explanation?
Absolutely. I think you have phrased it and articulated it in a much better way. That was exactly what I was trying to refer to, that in the case of Sindh or even Balochistan, it's the state-society relationship has taken probably qualitatively different forms, and the support base of the ruling coalition in Sindh and Balochistan is probably more semi-feudal, or is dominated by patronage networks, and the nature of that patron-client relationship is probably more rooted in rural elites and landlords. Whereas in KP and Punjab, we have seen these demographic changes where semi-urban, educated middle class is exerting a different kind of pressure from below on the political elite. So I can't agree more on this.
So this also then points to the fact that this crisis cannot be addressed with technicalities only or technical solutions, right? Especially in the case of Balochistan and Sindh, there has to be some sort of a political settlement, if I use that framework drawing from Mushtaq Khan's work. So and that would require zoom out from education sector and look at the overall political economy of uneven development. So as you mentioned, you are, I would like to point out here, you are one of the first Rhodes scholar from Balochistan, right? So elites may even use your examples, political elites, that it doesn't mean if you're from Balochistan you can still do well, but I would say you're an outlier. The education system is doing it. Using these outliers cannot be used as an argument to say that education systems are doing well. But tell us about this overall framework of uneven development. How do you conceptualize it?
I think, in my humble opinion, in Pakistan, the roots of uneven development can be traced back to the colonial period. It was the colonial state that sort of laid the foundation of the uneven development, uneven territorial presence across different regions. To quote on some of the insightful work that has been done on colonial policies and motivations in the then subcontinent, I think, as has been argued by scholars like Adnan Nasimullah and others, that they were driven by different motivations in different regions. So from conquest to extraction to strategic interests So, so a combination of conquest, economic extraction, and strategic motives shaped and defined colonial policy across subcontinent. The regions that came to make contemporary Pakistan. So here we can see that, for example, the British had economic interests in Punjab and Sindh, and even parts of Peshawar Valley or parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So here you can see that there are different policies which primarily aimed at extracting the agricultural surplus and enabling a minimum level of human capital development that can manage the state affairs. Whereas within the KP province, as you move past Peshawar Valley, they did not have economic interests in what is today known as former FATA or Balochistan. So here, strategic interests about potential Russian expansionism shaped their policy. But what that means for contemporary development, what it means is that when Pakistan came into being, there were already the development trajectories of these regions were already significantly divergent. Canal colonies, colonial era schools, universities, Government College University, Punjab University, Peshawar Islamia College, and then railway network. These were all the products of colonial state. What is more interesting for me is that the post-colonial state of Pakistan not only maintained these inequalities, these spatial inequalities, but in some cases also reinforced and widened them. So to analyze this, I think I can the roots of this this can be traced back to two factors. First is the formal institutional structure of post-colonial Pakistan. The second is the informal power relations. So to begin with the formal relations, I think Pakistan's federal system has not only institutionalized spatial inequality and but has also widened and exacerbated it over the years. So let me quote two examples: the political aspect of federalism and the economic or fiscal side of it. So to begin with the political side, the current federal system was envisaged or provided in the 1973 Constitution and is widely recognized as a better federal model than was provided in the 1962 and 1956 Constitutions. In my humble opinion, the 1973 Constitution simply institutionalized the hegemony of the Punjab as a federating unit and relegated a small province like Balochistan to a permanent minority status. It introduced a bicameral legislature with the intent to offset the tyranny of the majority, but because the Senate was not given any meaningful powers, the Senate effectively remained a debating club. And what it has meant is that over the years, any political party that aspires to come into power at the federal level has almost no or zero incentive to invest in Balochistan or care about the interests of the people of Balochistan or a place like former FATA. Now, with this incentive structure, I don't blame any political party not prioritizing Balochistan, and all other issues of lopsided economic development, inequitable development, they originate from this incentive or design problem. The second aspect is the economic or fiscal federalism part. As we all know that the National Finance Commission distributes the resources not only between the center and the federating units, but also among the federating units. Now, for over 40 years, population was used as the sole criteria to distribute funds among the federating units. And only in the 2010, marginal changes were made to it. And now let me share with you that even today, there are more than 30 federations in the world. There is not even a single federation in the world which uses population alone to distribute funds among its federating units. And even up to this day, there is not even a single federation where the weightage of population is more than 60% or 70% in the horizontal distribution formula. Let's take the case of our neighbor India. I mean, we have inherited similar political and economic systems. In India, the weight of population is around 25%, and they have locked that at the last census. And they have even introduced an additional indicator on population planning. In case of Pakistan, population is the single biggest determinant of political and economic power. So this sort of is the root cause of all other issues of uneven development. They stem and originate from this lopsided incentive structure. And on the economic front, as I shared, it's the fiscal problem. I think this is my explanation of how the formal institutional structure in Pakistan has contributed to uneven development and in some cases even widening of regional inequalities. But we can talk about the informal relations.
Nice. This is very useful because you do not just underscore the broad structural factors, but you're specifying the concretes here, i.e. the distribution between provinces. So in other words, like the 18th Amendment and the NFC in some ways recognized the historical marginalization of places like Balochistan, KP, and newly merged districts. So its politics of recognition is being acknowledged to some extent, but the politics of redistribution, i.e. the equitable resources should be distributed in a way that does not just reflect the per capita allocation, but also the historical disadvantage and marginalization. So I think this is what I assume would be an inclusive development agenda, should be about not just redistribution across class lines, but also redistribution along these spatial geographic lines. So in terms of envisioning this inclusive development, what is your take? Like, are there any prospects of conceptualizing a progressive Pakistan without incorporating aspirations of these peripheral regions like Balochistan?
I don't think we can see a prosperous and stable Pakistan without a prosperous, stable Balochistan or South Punjab or former FATA for that matter. And I think you rightly pointed out the role of the 18th Amendment and the 7th NFC award. Let me build on that argument and say that for a place like Balochistan, the 18th Amendment was probably too little, too late. But it still was a major step forward. The argument that I would like to make and build upon what you have already highlighted is that so the most simple notion of a good federal state is the one that has the right balance between self-rule and shared rule. So you have to devolve certain powers to the federating units, and then the powers that you are keeping at the central level, those powers should be exercised sharedly or jointly by the federating units. So I think the 18th Amendment was a major step forward in ensuring self-rule in the Constitution of Pakistan. In my opinion, the unfinished agenda of the 18th Amendment is ensuring shared rule in the Constitution of Pakistan. So in the center, the hegemony of the Punjab as a federating unit remains intact. We have the Punjab-dominated National Assembly. The Senate's powers remain the same as they were before the 18th Amendment. Now let's talk about the bureaucracy. The army and the bureaucracy are again dominated by the most populous province of the country, judiciary. So this is a very interesting argument. Many people don't like it, but I have reviewed the Supreme Court's performance with regards to those clauses of the Constitution that govern center-province relations. And many disputes related constitutional clauses have gone to the Supreme Court, and nearly every time the Supreme Court has acted in a centrist way, even after the 18th Amendment. Now, I'm not surprised because the military, the bureaucracy, and other non-political state apparatus have always remained centric. But in this case, even the political elites of Punjab have also historically tended to favor centric tendencies. But Here, the question of representation in state structures becomes important. To elaborate this, so for example, an ethnic Baloch from Balochistan has never made it to the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Not even as a judge, let alone as becoming the Chief Justice of Pakistan. There was one ethnic Baloch from Balochistan in 1990s. He was appointed on ad hoc basis for a year or two. Now, this is the extent of exclusion. Currently, there are nearly 50 civil servants in grade 22. Not even one ethnic Baloch from Balochistan among these. So these are just few instances of the degree of exclusion in the bureaucratic and judicial power structures of the country. And no wonder when you see then the proclivity of these institutions for behaving in centrist ways, that shouldn't or doesn't surprise us. So I think the unfinished agenda of the 18th Amendment is how can we ensure shared rule in the real sense of the word in the center, which means diluting the hegemony of the Punjab as a federating units and giving more space and real empowerment to the smaller provinces, not only in the political sense, but also in the executive and judicial sense. And that's why I thought the idea of a constitutional court where equal representation, when there is parity among provinces in terms of representation, is not a bad idea.
Fascinating. I mean, there's so many other points to discuss, but in the interest of time, I'll stop here. Thank you so much, Rafi, for sharing your thoughts, and hopefully we can continue this next time. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. Until next time, this is Danish Khan signing off from Fiscal Focus at DawnNews English.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the insightful discussion.